Welcome investors, and thanks for joining us on your Investment Advisor channel, where we decipher the markets so you can make actionable investment steps. I'm Jake Ackerman. Consumer Price Index data was released this morning, and unfortunately, it comes in a little bit hotter than expected. What in the world is the Consumer Price Index? It's directly correlated to inflation. It has made up of different metrics. In today's video, we're going to cover two things, really. What the data said this morning, and what in the world is the Consumer Price Index, and why does the Fed use that to gauge whether they're going to hike rates, whether they're going to lower rates, whether they're going to tighten monetary policy, whether they're going to loosen it. If you find value from this video, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to our channel so we can keep you updated on what's really going on under the hood in the markets. So let's take a deep dive right into it. So this morning, inflation came in hotter than expected, Consumer Price Index, and before I pull this up on your screen, we need to clarify two things. Number one is the Consumer Price Index, which is made up of food, energy, housing, transportation, all the inflation data conglomerated into one thing. And there's another metric the Federal Reserve likes to use, and that's core Consumer Price Index, core CPI that you'll see on your screen here. And that's simply the exact same thing, excluding food and energy, because food and energy are quite volatile. So they want to see the inflation trending in one direction when you have a really volatile price movement. For example, crude oil. I mean, crude oil can move up 5%, down 10%. Sometimes it's all over the place, and that can throw some. It may not give us a clear picture on where inflation's going. So the Fed likes to exclude those really volatile data points and use just the consistent ones to find out which way inflation is truly trending. So as promised, let me pull it up on your screen here, the data this morning. So for August, we found that the Consumer Price Index rose 0.06% in August, and which was the biggest monthly gain of 2023, but that was as expected. Now, what wasn't expected and what the Fed highlights all of their meetings is the core Consumer Price Index. What you'll see there is the core CPI increased 0.3 and the expectation was 0.2. What does that mean? That means, again, inflation came in unfortunately hotter than expected. Fed has been fighting this inflation battle throughout 2022 and into 2023. Does this give them another reason to hike rates? Potentially. Now, are they going to do it this September meeting, which is next week? The betting markets and the stock market say no. The bond market, which is the interest rate market, on the other hand, is saying there's a possibility, but it may not happen until the following meeting, which is the end of October, leading into November. All right, so we'll have more data. If we get another hot inflation print, another more hot inflation data, you better believe we're going to get that interest rate hike in November, unless the economy is deteriorating, if we see significant job losses, and that might change the Fed's mindset whether they're going to raise interest rate or not. But like I said, in the beginning of this video, I want to give you a real breakdown. Just what is Consumer Price Index? Why is the Fed looking at that? And how are they coming up with this information? So let me pull this up on your screen here. Let's take a look what exactly the Consumer Price Index is. So the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, is constructed each month using 80,000 items in a fixed basket of goods and services, representing what Americans buy in their everyday lives, from gasoline at the pump and apples at the grocery stores, cable TV fees, and doctor's visits. Things we need to keep in mind with this data is it's your everyday items that we go and buy. They're tracking what I paid in July. Let's say I paid $1 for an apple. Well, what am I paying in August? And if prices rose anywhere from 0.3 to 0.6%, that's how much more I'm paying. So I paid $1 in July, and now in August, I'm paying $1.03. Maybe I'm paying $1.06. I'm paying somewhere in that region if that segment of the data is going up that amount. Now, hopefully we have a little bit better understanding of exactly this, made up just of all these different things that we go and purchase as consumers, from, again, doctor's visits. I'm paying at the gasoline. Let me give you an exact breakdown of how the Consumer Price Index is weighted, because there's an important point that we need to keep in mind, that the Fed comes up with the weights of these different segments on there. And it's going to make more sense as soon as I put up on your screen. And also on your screen here, you're going to see another inflation data point. That's titled, it says PCE, that's personal consumer expenditures. And if you've been following us for a while now, you know that we highlight PCE, inflation data, personal consumer expenditures, and we highlight CPI, consumer price index, because they're both very important. The Fed brings them up every meeting, and they use them to track inflation, just different weights. This should make more sense now. Let me pull this up on your screen here. So this is a graph made by the Hutchins Center, and all they did was they took the data from the Federal Reserve's website and just put it into a graph to make it more visually understanding. So on your left, we have the consumer price index. And on the right, we have the PCE. And in the middle are the main weights. So you get your food and beverage, which is that dark blue, housing, light blue, transportation, yellow, medical care, green, recreation, that pink, and then other goods and services is in that orange. And you can see in the CPI, that main data point is housing, making up 42.1%. And then you see in PCE, it only makes up 22.6%. And then the next one for CPI, the biggest weight, is that transportation, where transportation is only 9.8% on the PCE. So you see they vary, they just have different weights to give us a better gauge on which way inflation's trending. Again, we need to keep in mind is the Fed can change these weights. They do it, and they were doing it on a every 2-year basis. Now they're doing it on an annual basis. So they can, depending on what they really want to happen, if you could, you could say that, or maybe it's just what they believe is the right way to measure it. However you'd like to determine that for yourself. They can change the way it's being, more strongly related to services, maybe more strongly more related to your consumer goods, your food. They can tweak this in a way that they want on an annual basis now, and they did this last March of this year. So just something to keep in mind as we're seeing the inflation numbers trend down from 9% to 3%. But here's the thing, inflation is still rising. It's just rising at a slower pace. Instead of 9%, it's only raising 3%. So the prices are still going up, just slower. So have they defeated inflation? Absolutely not. Is it coming down? Yes. Are we seeing deflationary pressures? Yes. But are prices still going up? The answer is also yes. So I've had a lot of clients ask me, hey Jake, the Fed's, did we actually get a soft landing? When is the Fed going to cut rates? When does this turn around? I'm looking to buy a house. I'm looking to, lease a car, finance a car, but these rates are just unaffordable. So when is the Fed going to cut rates? And we don't really know when they're going to cut rates other than by looking at history, what they've done in the past, and when did they start cutting rates. And something that we need to keep in mind is, before I show this to you folks, is we don't know when we're in a recession until we're well into a recession. Okay? So keep that in mind. We don't know we're in one until we're actually in one. So I'm going to pull up these data points on our screen here, and we're going to go through this together to find out when the Fed may cut rates. All right, what I have up on your screen here is a history of recessions. We're going to start with the 1980s, and we're going to compare them to what the Fed was doing with interest rates. So the first one we'll take a look at here is the energy crisis of January to July 1980. What was Fed doing with interest rates? So they were hiking at the beginning of 1980 up until April of 1980, and things started to deteriorate. And they started cutting rates immediately up until July 1980. And next one, energy crisis number 2, July 1981 to November 1982. July 1981, right here at the top of the rate hikes, if I can get my mouse up there, until November 1982. So cut until November 1982. And again, they didn't really know that we were in a recession. They were doing two things. They were battling massive inflation, so they had to keep raising rates, but had to balance it with cutting rates because it kept pushing us into a recession. All right, let's move on here. How about we move to the dot-com recession here, March to November 2001. So March 2001, what was going on here? The Fed was already cutting rates. The Fed was cutting rates January 2001. And they cut rates well into 2023. And that's because asset prices were falling. The stock market was falling. And they were trying to combat the recession, so they started cutting rates. But again, we didn't know a recession. The bubble really didn't pop until after they were cutting rates. And the last one, I don't even need to pull that back up. We all know what happened in the Great Financial Crisis in 2007. So they started cutting rates in 2007, leading into 2008 and 2009. So you see, folks, unfortunately, throughout history, at least from the 80s, and definitely before that, it's been as very similar circumstances, very similar ending to when the Fed starts cutting rates. They usually are cutting rates when something is broken, when things start to break, when unemployment goes up, when there's banking issues, when there's financing issues, when there's consumer issues, when there's geopolitical issues. When the Fed goes on these rate-raising campaigns, they start to cut rates when things start to go south. So that's what we keep an eye out for. When they start cutting rates, it's generally we're in a recession. So that's something to keep an eye out for. So maybe if they don't cut rates, we're all good. But we'll see. We'll keep you updated on that. So next week, we're going to take a deep dive into what the Federal Reserve said on their Wednesday press conference, where they make their interest rate decision. So tune in for that deep dive. Expertise you deserve, experience you can count on.